So it looks like we do have another question in chat from Pawnum Share. Have either of you read the book Sandworm? Is kind of question number one, and then question number two are thoughts on the pervasiveness of Russian state-sponsored hacking versus Chinese.
I haven't read the book Sandworm. When I got to Cyber Command, I was told that General Alexander, who was, I think probably a lot of people are aware, he was the director of NSA and the first commander of Cybercom, and he said he wanted all the flag officers, the generals and admirals, to read two books. One was Worm, and the other one was Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking. And I figured out that after I was there about 2 months, that I was the only one that actually had read both books. And so, and they were good, because I figured out that, hacking started long before 2012. It went back to whatever it was, 1986 or something like that. When
longer than that, but yeah.
Yeah. So it went back a long time. And the other thing that I learned was a quick story. I was over in an area NSA where you have the people that have special skills at operating in other people's networks. And so it was actually a former Marine who no longer looked like a Marine, but he was now working there as a civilian. And I'm in this really super classified area, and he is his job that day was educate the new Cyber Command J3, the director of operations, on how they do their hacking. And he said, well, first we do this and first we do that. And I go, oh, and then you do this, 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 and this. And he said, yeah, how'd you know that? And I said, I read this book, Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking. And I said, so what makes you guys so good? Are you just that much better? And he goes, no, I'm in blogs with 10 other guys that are just as good as me. He said, well, here's what makes us so good. He says, it's the resources we have available. If I run into this, pick whatever it is, device, IDS, fire. If I run into this thing, he points to this guy through the glass on the other side, and he goes, I go get that guy right there, right? And within about 2 hours, he has developed a tool that on the open market might cost $500,000, and I'm able to go to the next place I need to go. So, the processes for doing this, are well known. They're available in these books, right? And so, you just got to read them and pay attention. That's just how much effort you put into it.
So I'm gonna press you on the question a little bit, because I'm not satisfied with that answer, and I'll kind of elaborate on it a little bit. Right? Is a couple weeks ago I had a former intelligence analyst who spent 10 years doing intel at the agency, came out, worked for a number of contractors, continuing to do intel for the agency, and I asked him this question, so I'm going to ask you the same question as well. Do you think the United States is appropriately prepared to defend itself from Russia or Chinese cyber attacks?
No.
Why not?
Why not? Because fundamentally, we do not operate. This is something we're going to talk about later. We do not take this on as a national security effort where we are truly focused on defending the nation through a collective defense approach, just like we defend everything else. And it's fundamentally about, and when we talk a little more about collective defense at lower level, but at this national level, we have got to get our act together on public sector, private sector collaboration and coordination, because as much as we like to say in Cyber Command when I was there, our job is to defend the nation's cyberspace. Hey, guess who's on the front lines in cyberspace every day? It is corporate America. It's the people that run the critical infrastructure, the banks, water, telecommunications, transportation, finance, hospitals, blah, 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 blah. And, the story I always talk about is when the Iranians, the first kind of activity I saw at Cyber Command was, if you remember, when the Iranians were conducting the denial of service attacks against the banks in 2012, right?
I remember that.
And so a couple of things came very clear to me. One, that's when I learned what polymorphic malware was and why signature-based defenses don't work, because it's extremely easy to change whatever it is McAfee or Symantec has loaded in and bypass it. So that's why you've got to find another way to detect that stuff. But number two is, look, we've got capability inside the government to, and people have heard this a lot. I'll claim to be the first one that brought it to this domain, was to be able to kill the archer, right?
Yeah.
In 1415, the French figured out that it was not near as much fun to catch arrows as it was to kill archers, right? And so, we reserve that legally. We reserve that capability for the United States government. in our country to be able and block those arrows or kill the archer. And frankly, we've got pretty good intel, and with the right keys or the right pointers, we could figure out where some of this stuff is and pretty much have an effect. But just in the banking sector alone at that time, they didn't have a good way to share information in real time about what was going on, who was getting hit, what did it look like, what was the metadata around it, et cetera, et cetera. And then above and beyond that, we're sitting over in Cyber Command, and we have almost no way to communicate with them. It's got to go through DHS, and it's got to go around the corner, and you're communicating with by then it's all over. We're actually learning more because of what the Iranians are posting in Pastebin than we are based on our internal collaboration, right? Yeah. And so the reason we aren't prepared to deal with the Chinese and the Russians is because we have not yet cracked the nut on how to do collective defense as a company. How do we leverage the strengths of the private sector and the public sector? How do we bring those together in a very effective way so we have a common picture of what's going on, and we're able to share information and share data in an appropriately anonymized way so that we can enable both the private sector to do what they have to do best, which is fundamentally defend, and then the unique capabilities that the government has to be more proactive in those defensive measures. And so that's why we aren't prepared. And then, Neil, and I told you to cut me off whenever you're ready. There's an entire other layer that goes back to the Russians, right? That while everybody in the world is dependent on the internet, right? I would argue that that the Americans are uniquely vulnerable to disinformation, uniquely vulnerable to social engineering in a way that clearly the Russians have figured out how to take advantage of, and clearly the Chinese are figuring out how to take advantage of. And the Iranians, they know that the financial sector and things like that are the quickest ways to get to us. So they know where our vulnerabilities are as a society and as a culture. And they also know that as we become more politically frictionalized, right, that being able to capitalize on those internal divisions gets us focused internally. And, and we don't have time to focus externally. And here's the problem. Go ahead. My last point is back to the Chinese and the Russians. All right. We like away games, right? Take Northern Africa, right? Hand wave across the map. Let's fight in the Straits of Taiwan. Right. Let's do all of that stuff, right? But if we get into something serious with the Russians or the Chinese, the first strike is going to be right here at home, and it's going to be banks or finance or water. It's going to be something like that. And people get up in arms if Netflix is, or Zoom was off this morning, right? And it becomes political issues, gets us focused internally. So for just those reasons and more I could go into, my answer to are we ready to deal with the Russians and the Chinese is no, at least not sufficiently.
For up-to-the-minute cybersecurity news, make sure you follow and subscribe to the Cyber and Security channel on Twitch and YouTube. Also, make sure you turn on those notifications so that you know when we go live.